Don't go to work today, you'll see why. That's the entire text. 6:12 in the morning, and Alan, our crusty old legal counsel who once threatened to sue a vending machine for false advertising, sends me that. No punctuation, no emojis. Just that bone-dry warning sitting in my notifications like a bomb with the pin halfway pulled. I'm still in my robe, barefoot in the kitchen, blinking at the screen while the coffee sputters behind me like it's in on the drama. Outside, the frost is melting off the neighbor's lawn flamingos, and inside, my phone starts buzzing again. Slack notifications, LinkedIn pings, I scroll and there it is, post after post. Excited to welcome bold new leadership, thrilled for the next chapter with Blake Carrington, honored to be part of this transition under visionary guidance. Visionary guidance. Jesus wept. I swipe through the corporate bootlicking parade, each post more sycophantic than the last, until I see the one that really gets me. A glossy Photoshop portrait of Blake, the founder's Ivy League spawn, now acting CEO, posed like he's auditioning for a tech bro biopic. Caption day one, let's do this. He did it then. Actually did it, and I'm not there to see it. I lean against the counter, sip my coffee, and just breathe. My inbox is already a war zone. Meeting cancellations. Need your review. Where's the Q4 compliance outline? Still waiting on your sign-off for Phase 3, Margaret. The project teams are scrambling, but no one's told them I'm gone yet. Or maybe Blake thought he'd just delete my name from the org chart and the machine would keep humming. I let the mug warm my hands. No trembling, no panic, just stillness. You ever stand outside your own life and watch the circus unfold without you? That's what it felt like someone hit pause on 20 years of blood, bone, and bureaucracy, and suddenly I was just a woman with coffee and nowhere to be. And hey, if you've made it this far, do me a small favor. Tap that subscribe button, maybe give this story a like. 90% of you don't, and I get it, who wants another notification? But seriously, it helps the team keep telling stories like this one. The kind that burn a little going down. Anyway, yesterday I was fired. Not in a whisper behind closed doors kind of way. Not in a budget cuts are hard kind of way. No, this was Blake's big entrance. A decisive pivot toward modernization, he called it, in front of the board. In the middle of what was supposed to be a quarterly planning meeting. He stood at the head of the conference table like he was pitching a Shark Tank idea, not gutting a department. We've analyzed the org chart and found redundancies in operational oversight, he'd said, voice slick with the confidence of someone who's never filed a government contract in his life. Effective immediately, Margaret's role is being sunsetted. Sunsetted. I didn't speak, didn't flinch. Just picked up my planner, slid my badge across the glass table and walked out. I remember someone, maybe Diane from finance, reaching toward me like she might say something, but nothing came out. Just wide eyes and that awkward, airless pause that falls over a room when someone realizes they've witnessed a mistake in real time. Blake never looked up, and now I'm here. Still in my robe, watching the empire he thinks he runs unravel like cheap thread. The thing is, he doesn't know about Clause 17.2. No one does, not really. Not until they need it. I glance at the framed photo on the wall, our team from the early days, back when the office carpet still smelled like drywall and hope. I remember filing the paperwork myself, drafting the continuity agreement with Alan, ensuring that Phase 3 of our $900 million contract couldn't move forward without the named compliance officer's physical presence. A clause nobody cared about until they did. And guess whose name is still on it? I smile just a little. The muffins in the oven are rising. My inbox is in flames. And somewhere in a glass conference room downtown, Blake Carrington is about to learn what happens when you fire the woman holding the fuse. The morning light had barely settled on the 42nd floor when the meeting invite dropped. Subject line: Leadership Realignment, 8:30 a.m. mandatory. No agenda. No context. Just a time, a room number, and a sinking feeling that made my stomach clench harder than the expired yogurt I'd accidentally eaten the night before. I showed up on time because of course I did. 2 decades in this company, through mergers, layoffs, and the time the building caught fire because some idiot microwaved foil, I was the one who still brought a notepad to meetings, who remembered birthdays, who could spot a compliance risk before legal even finished the coffee. I ran operations like a spine ran a body. Silent, firm, necessary. And I was about to be amputated. Lake stood at the head of the table like he was about to bless the wine. Fresh navy suit, pocket square folded like origami, smile so white it probably had its own line item on the dental budget. He opened with a joke, something about shaking things up, and the board chuckled like trained seals waiting for fish. Then came the slides. He called it the forward pivot, complete with animated arrows, fake metrics, and a photo of Elon Musk for no damn reason. Moving away from legacy workflows and into agile verticals, he said, like he was auditioning for TEDx Dayton. To that end, we've identified key structural redundancies. And there it was, my name up on a screen, next to a red X and the words, Roll Sunset Recommendation. I didn't hear the rest. I heard the blood in my ears. I heard 20 years echoing in my skull, late nights, red eyes to Sacramento, calming clients mid-crisis, hand-coding audit responses when we couldn't afford interns. I heard every holiday missed, Every anniversary dinner rescheduled. Every time I answered the phone at 2:14 a.m. because no one else knew how to fix the vendor portal when it crashed. Now I was a line on a slide. A footnote in Blake's performance theater. He kept going, still smiling. We appreciate Margaret's contributions, but this move is essential for streamlining future operations. Essential. There was a murmur around the room. Not outrage, just discomfort, like people weren't quite sure if they were supposed to clap. Alan, the legal counsel, looked like someone had just farted under his chair. He didn't blink, didn't speak, just crossed his arms and stared at Blake with that squint he reserved for dumb contract clauses and even dumber people. I stood, smooth, no chair scrape, no dramatic pause, just stood, pulled my badge from my lanyard, set it gently on the glass table. For a second, I caught Blake's eye. He smiled again, tight this time, like he thought he'd won something. I didn't say a word, I just walked out. Past the portraits of former founders, past the receptionist who half stood like she didn't know whether to hug me or call security, past the security guard who gave me a nod like he already knew the truth. Outside, the wind was bitter. I didn't zip my coat. On the drive home, I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I just watched the frozen parking lots roll by and let the silence stretch out long and strange, like my life had dropped into neutral and was coasting somewhere new. That night, I deleted nothing. I saved everything. My contract, the compliance clauses, the vendor logs, the email chains. All of it backed up to 3 drives and a password-protected folder Alan didn't even know I still had access to. 'Cause here's the thing, I don't rage. I don't throw things or sob in public restrooms or post passive-aggressive Bible verses on Facebook. I wait, I watch, I document. Blake thought he made a move, but he doesn't even know the game, not yet. The house was too quiet, not the bad kind of quiet, like after a fight or when the power goes out and the fridge hum disappears. No, this was different. A clean quiet. The kind that slips under your skin and settles there. Just warm enough to remind you you're alive, but cool enough to make you wonder what the hell is coming next. I was standing in the kitchen in socks, watering my half-dead basil like it hadn't already given up on me last October. Sunlight spilled across the counter, catching the chrome of the stand mixer I never used unless I was angry or about to commit tax fraud via banana bread. This morning, I chose muffins. Blueberry. With real butter. Not the off-brand garbage Blake had stocked in the break room after his first budget audit. The batter hissed slightly as I spooned it into the tray. Calm, focused, like a surgeon before the first incision. Across the street, my neighbor Tina was out with her yappy poodle and thermal mug of pumpkin spice something. She waved, squinting. "Aren't you usually gone by now?" She called out. I shrugged. "New schedule." She laughed, not getting it, and toddled down the sidewalk talking to the dog like it paid rent. Inside, I opened my laptop, not work, just the dashboard I'd built for myself over the years. Ops Pulse, vendor syncs, compliance task queues. It wasn't connected to anything sensitive, no contract violations here, but it showed the heartbeat of the project. And right now, flatline. Emails were stacking up, 32 and climbing. Project leads asking for framework clarifications. Phase 3 approvals. Where was the checklist? Who was signing off? Had anyone seen Margaret? They hadn't, and they wouldn't. Slack channels buzzed with confusion. A thread in hash compliance chat. Is someone else handling the Tier 2 approval? I thought we were still waiting on Margaret's sign-off. Wasn't she on PTO? Didn't Blake fire her? Then it went quiet. Like the air after lightning hits too close. Meanwhile, in my kitchen, smell of baking filled the room like nostalgia on a leash. I flipped on the old radio, the one that still picked up static from the power lines. Classic rock, a bit of Boston. I turned it low and watched the inbox keep ticking. Something about absence makes the noise louder. I wasn't responding. I wasn't even refreshing. I just let it roll, slow and inevitable, like floodwater down a basement stairwell. The project, our biggest contract, our crown jewel, was tilting. Not because I was special. Not because I was some corporate martyr, but because the damn structure was never built to stand without someone who actually knew it. And Blake, genius that he is, hadn't read the manual. I moved through the house like I had nowhere to be, folded laundry, unloaded the dishwasher, opened a cabinet and laughed when I saw the mug that said world's okayest boss from the year we survived the ransomware attack and still made bonus. I used to sip coffee from that mug while rewriting vendor scripts at midnight, keeping our phase 2 rollout on schedule. Now it just felt like a relic from a version of me who thought loyalty mattered. I took the muffins out, perfect dome tops. Golden, fluffy like promises before a layoff. The inbox ticked again. 49 unread, then 52. Then a ping, Alan. One message, they're starting to notice. That was it. I set the phone down. Let it buzz on the countertop like a dying bee. The emails could wait. The Slack pings could rot. Let them scramble. Because in the quiet, I finally heard the truth. I wasn't missing the chaos. The chaos was missing me. Blake had them eating out of the palm of his manicured hand. The emergency session started at 9 o'clock sharp in conference room A, blinds drawn, phones off, water poured by some poor intern who probably still thought disruption was a good thing. The board trickled in, some grumbling, some curious. A few wore the expressions of people who'd bet on a horse just to find out it had 3 legs and asthma. Blake stood tall, hair too perfect, tie too bold. His laptop projected slide 1, visionary leadership, Realignment for scalable growth. Alan was already seated in the corner. Didn't even look up as Blake launched into his pitch, pacing the room like a man who thought charisma could plug regulatory holes. His slides were sleek. Buzzwords polished like showroom sedans. Future-facing verticals. Efficiency optimization. Agility at scale. He even threw in Web3 ready, and no one had the spine to ask what the hell that meant in operations compliance. Then came the big swing. Our Phase 3 implementation will move forward with increased velocity now that we've streamlined legacy oversight. Removing bottlenecks was critical, Blake said, smiling just a bit too wide. The team is already working on revised compliance checklists as we speak. That's when Alan finally looked up, clicked his pen once. No drama, he said. Blake paused. Something unclear. Alan adjusted his glasses, then reached into his folder and pulled out a document. No screen share, no slide. Just a stapled paper with red tabs like blood on snow. He cleared his throat, flipped one page, and began reading. Clause 17.2. In the event of personnel changes, the named compliance officer listed in Appendix B must be physically present to authorize all activities tied to Phase 3 execution. In absence of said officer, operations must immediately cease until a formal replacement is approved by the client's legal team, in writing, with a 14-day review period. Silence. Someone near the window coughed. One of the board members, Gail, I think, blinked twice, then slowly swiveled in her chair to face Blake. Alan kept going, voice dry as Arizona dirt. Appendix B, updated July 14th, still lists Margaret Alcott as the sole named compliance officer for the $900 million government infrastructure contract currently defined as Phase 3. The room stopped breathing. Blake opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again like a trout on a dock. That can't be right, she's not even with the company anymore. Alan raised one eyebrow, and whose decision was that? No one answered. Another board member leaned in. Wait, so you're saying we can't legally move forward with anything until Margaret is reinstated? Alan smiled thin. Correct. Blake stammered, well, can't we just name someone else? Alan didn't blink, not without formal approval from the client's oversight committee. And that committee is cautious. They like continuity. They like consistency. They don't like surprises. Especially not when they're wiring $900 million. More silence. The kind that hums in your ears and makes your teeth itch. Alan leaned back, steepled his fingers. Her removal without pre-approved transition paperwork automatically triggers a breach notification, which, in turn, requires us to report it to the client's compliance division within 24 hours. And if Phase 3 activity continued past that point, liquidated damages, someone whispered. To the tune of $150,000 per hour, Alan finished. That did it. The founder's brother, Stanley, who'd retired 3 years ago but still had honorary voting rights, slammed his hand on the table. Who the hell let this happen? Eyes turned. No one spoke. Blake was sweating now. Literally. His collar had wilted and that perfect tie looked more like a noose. Alan folded the document and tucked it neatly into his folder. Gentlemen, ladies, we haven't even received the client's breach inquiry yet, but we will, likely today. He stood slowly. When that happens, the project shuts down, dead, and there is only one person who can authorize its restart. He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. They all knew. At 10:06 a.m., the first alert hit engineering. Subject line, urgent. Stop work order Phase 3 by 10:12. The development team in St. Louis was booted out of the portal. Access denied. Secure systems grayed out like a power outage. Calls to the vendor support lines rang unanswered because they got the same alert. One read it out loud in disbelief. Due to noncompliance with Clause 17.2 of the Continuity Agreement, all activity related to Phase 3 of Contract #914B is hereby suspended until further notice. Do not proceed. Do not override. At 10:23, the Baltimore vendor pulled their people from the site. Cables half-laid, monitors still humming. They packed up without explanation, leaving their client-side liaison blinking in the dust. By 10:31, procurement froze all PO authorizations tied to Phase 3, down to the coffee filters and backup diesel for the server bunkers. And by 10:47, the client's legal office sent a single, brutal message to our general inbox. We are formally notifying your company that continued work without the named compliance officer present constitutes breach of contract. You are instructed to cease all activities immediately. Penalty enforcement begins as of 09:00 this morning. We'll be monitoring your systems. Do not test us. $150,000 per hour, starting from 9 sharp, 12 missed hours by end of day, $1.8 million. And that was just the opening act. Inside HQ, the lights were still on, but Blake's charm had already died. He stood in the middle of the operations command room, flanked by analysts too young to shave and advisors too gutless to speak. Someone printed the stop work order. Someone else highlighted it like yellow ink could soften the blow, but nothing helped. Every vendor was frozen, every timeline dead. The whiteboard that once tracked milestones now read, "Who is named officer?" in frantic red expo marker. Down the hall, legal's door was shut tight. Alan was inside, probably counting how long it would take to burn the whole structure down. I imagined him with his sleeves rolled up and that little smirk he gets when someone finally steps on their own landmine. By noon, the founder was in the air. Word was he'd gotten a call in Zurich while presenting at some tech and ethics panel. Mid-sentence, his assistant whispered something in his ear. Next thing, he's on a private jet. No press, no handshake, just gone. Back at HQ, Blake tried to put on a show. He summoned a department heads meeting in the executive lounge. Rolled out his contingency strategy. It was 10 bullet points of pure, unfiltered bullshit. "We'll just appoint a new compliance officer," he said, trying to sound calm. Alan didn't look up from his legal pad. "You can't. Why not? Clause 17.2. Approval requires a 14-day client vetting window. You waived that option when you terminated the named officer without transition notice. So what the hell do we do?" Alan looked at him. "Cold, nothing, you wait and pay." Someone from the finance team quietly excused themselves, probably to cry or call their broker. Blake turned to the room like a magician who'd just pulled a live skunk from his hat. "Let's be solution-oriented here," he snapped. But the room had already shifted. No one was nodding anymore. No one repeated his buzzwords. Even the junior staff who used to echo his talking points looked queasy. Because now it wasn't theory. It was money. It was lawsuits. It was blood on the spreadsheet. And I was home, watching it unfold from 3 time zones away, eating a muffin with blueberry still warm in the middle. My phone buzzed. Alan again. "We just crossed the $450K mark. They're finally realizing it." I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my files, found the original Clause 17.2 contract, double-checked the red lines. Then, with the same slow care I used to color-code disaster recovery plans, I began drafting my response. Not an offer, not a plea, just leverage, cold and clean. Blake wanted to play CEO. Now he could pay like one. At 1:02 p.m., Alan's message landed like a quiet drumbeat. "They're scrambling. No emojis, no punctuation, just 3 words. Sharp and surgical." I was in the sunroom, legs curled under me, mug in hand, cold tea by then, long forgotten. Outside, the neighbor's lawn guy wrestled with a weed whacker like it owed him money. But inside, the stillness felt orchestrated, like the house was holding its breath, waiting to exhale. I didn't rush. I didn't fumble. I set the mug down, wiped my hands on my jeans, and walked to my desk with the kind of calm you earn only after being underestimated for too long. The laptop hummed awake. First, I pulled up the contract directory, my personal backups, all clean, time-stamped, double-verified. I opened the original Phase 3 compliance charter. Every revision, every annotation, every signature in digital ink, right down to the time Blake's father, Harold, signed the continuity clause during a migraine and didn't even read the final line. I did. I wrote the final line. Clause 17.2 had always been mine, not just legally, but strategically. I embedded it when I realized no one else would fight to protect the operational spine of that $900 million monster of a project. I had stayed up past midnight redlining versions, predicting worst-case scenarios the boys in the C-suite laughed off as paranoid fiction. Turns out I don't write fiction. I write insurance policies with teeth. Alan pinged again. "Blake just asked if we can fast-track a replacement named officer. Client says no, they want you, specifically you." I didn't smile, I didn't gloat, I just breathed. Another message came. This one more cautious. "Would you consider returning, officially?" I leaned back in my chair, outside. The wind rattled the maple tree by the fence. A leaf landed on the glass, dead center. Bright orange, almost too perfect. Then I clicked over to my personal agreements folder. Pulled up the PDF I'd kept untouched since the day it was signed. Margaret Alcott Consulting Agreement Phase 3 Lifecycle. Signed by me. Signed by Harold Carrington. Dated, notarized, ironclad. The final page held the clause Blake never bothered to read when he fired me. Named consultant shall remain active for the life of the project unless terminated by mutual agreement or in the event of consultant's death. And guess what? I was still breathing. I attached the file to an empty email draft. No body text, no subject line, just that contract. Then I hit send. 2 minutes passed. 3. Then Alan again. Well played. I closed the laptop. Didn't check the response. Didn't need to. They'd read it. They'd read it slow. They'd pass it around like a ghost story told with the lights off, each line colder than the last. Blake would see his name, see his father's signature, and for the first time he'd understand what continuity really meant. The foundation was mine. The keys were mine. They could dig through every binder in that office, flip every desk upside down, but they wouldn't find a single document that could unwrite what I'd built. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to show up. I was already there, buried in every clause, laced into every deadline, alive in every dollar bleeding out by the hour. And now, finally, they knew it. The emergency board meeting started before sunrise even touched the lobby marble. They called it for 6:00 a.m., blinds closed, no coffee catered. Security posted outside the door like someone was going to try and make a run for it. No one made jokes. No one brought laptops. Everyone came with a folder and a face like they'd just gotten audited by the IRS and Satan at the same time. At the center of it all, Blake, the prodigal idiot in a wrinkled suit jacket and hair that had clearly been styled in a panic. He stood by the big screen, holding a laser pointer like it might deflect liability. His voice had lost that practiced TED talk edge. It cracked now, trembled at the edges like a kid bluffing his way through a book report he never read. He was already mid-sentence when Harold walked in. The founder. The man who built the company from a folding table and a dream about infrastructure that didn't collapse under pressure, unlike his son. No greetings, no warm return. Just the sound of leather soles as Harold crossed the room, adjusted his coat, and sat at the head of the table like he'd never left. Blake stopped talking. Alan didn't. He stood slowly, a crisp sheet of paper in hand, the same document he'd already read aloud once, now recited again with the weight of judgment behind every syllable. Clause 17.2, Alan said, voice low, clear. Named compliance officer must be present for all labor to proceed under Phase 3. In the absence of this individual, all work must halt immediately. No proxy authorization permitted without a 14-day vetting period. All parties were informed of this upon contract initiation. Appendix B names Margaret Alcott, still active, still binding. No one breathed. Blake tried to laugh, just a little. Okay, so clearly, that clause was intended to protect continuity in the case of turnover, not. Alan cut him off. It was intended to prevent reckless disruption, like firing the sole authorized compliance officer without a transition plan, which you did, in front of the board on your first day. Blake's face flushed. I was told we needed agility, streamlining. Margaret's role was redundant. Alan took a slow step forward. She built the role. Harold, who'd been silent, finally turned his eyes on his son. Cold, calculating. No rage, just disappointment distilled into something sharper. "Do you even read the continuity documents?" he asked. Blake's lips moved, no sound. The board shifted uncomfortably. No one wanted to make eye contact, not with Harold, not with each other. The only sound was the AC kicking on and the faint buzz of a light above flickering like it too wanted out. Harold leaned back. "You triggered a breach clause that's costing us $150,000 an hour." Blake tried again. "Well, technically legal should have flagged that clause as." Alan let out a short laugh. Not kind, not amused. Legal wrote the clause. The silence was now radioactive. One of the finance directors, Miriam, always cautious, whispered, "How much are we at now?" Alan didn't look up from his folder. $1.2 million and counting. Harold closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them again, he didn't speak to Blake. He spoke to the room. "What's our path to compliance restoration?" Alan didn't hesitate. "Reinstate Margaret, formally, immediately, with her original authority intact." Another board member coughed. "Is she willing?" Alan nodded. "She sent her consulting agreement this morning, still valid, life of project. She never terminated it, we did. And she's still willing?" Miriam asked, voice barely above a whisper. Alan paused. "For a price." Harold didn't flinch. "Then we pay it." He stood, adjusted his cuffs. Meeting adjourned. Blake took a step toward him. "Dad, please." Harold didn't even glance his way, just walked out. Blake was left in the center of the room, alone among the people who had once applauded his vision. No one said it, but it was written on every face around the table. The prodigy had crashed the ship. And the woman he threw overboard, she'd built the hull. The email came at 6:42 a.m. Subject line, "Formal reinstatement request, urgent response appreciated." It was dressed up in all the polite corporate lace they could stitch together on no sleep. Phrases like strategic opportunity to ensure continuity, and your return would provide essential stability to key operations. A paragraph about legacy stewardship. A link to a Zoom call at your earliest convenience. Signatures stacked like a paper apology. I read it once. Then again, slower. Not for the flattery, they didn't mean a word of it. What I was looking for was leverage. There it was, an attachment titled Restoration Terms Draft A. I opened it. They offered full reinstatement. Title unchanged. Salary up 12%. Back pay, of course, and a modest goodwill bonus. They threw in a parking spot and a relocation allowance like I was some junior hire flying in from Cincinnati. It read like a bandage over a bullet wound. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I took a walk. Just a lap around the block, past the neighbor's snow-dusted SUV and the trash cans still tipped from yesterday's wind. The cold bit through my sweater, sharp and refreshing. I let the silence settle in. No Slack, no Outlook, no phone tethered to my ribs, just the calm before a different kind of storm. When I returned, I opened a blank email. No greeting, no small talk. Just 3 lines: "I'm willing to return, but terms will be renegotiated. I want equity, and I want him gone." Attached, my own document. 1 page, no fluff. A bullet point list outlining the conditions of my return. 2% equity, vested immediately. Direct reporting line to the board only. Title changed to Executive Director of Continuity Strategy. Lake Carrington removed from any operational authority related to Phase 3 or future projects. No rehire clause for any of his hires. Clause 17.3 amended to include non-replaceable by proxy, effective upon my reinstatement. All renegotiated terms to be reviewed by client counsel and filed in contract addendum. I hit send and waited, didn't check the read receipt. didn't pace. Just made another pot of tea and watched the frost climb my back window like some slow-breathing thing trying to get in. At 7:19 a.m., Alan called, voice lower than usual. They're on a call with the client's legal team right now. The client's not happy. I didn't say anything. He kept going. Client legal says either you're reinstated or they walk. Full contract termination. That's their line in the sand. I heard the weight in his breath. Years of partnership on the verge of crumbling under one man's ego. Then he said they'll meet your terms, all of them. Still, I didn't gloat. I didn't cheer, just nodded to no one in particular. Blake, I asked. There was a pause. He'll be moved to a strategic advisory role. No contract access. No project authority. Just title and window dressing. Good, I said. We'll finalize the paperwork by end of day. I'd like you on a call tomorrow to announce the reinstatement. I poured the tea. Tomorrow's fine, I said. I ended the call, closed the laptop, and looked out at the quiet street. The sun was creeping over the rooftops, warming the tips of trees that had stood through the cold. For the first time in months, the light didn't feel artificial. They wanted a leader to fix their mess. Now they'd get one on my terms. The conference room was different this time. No PowerPoint, no spotlight, no smug declarations about sunsetting legacy roles. Just a long walnut table, a dozen stiff suits, and the low hum of someone trying not to breathe too loud. It smelled faintly of stale air and whatever panic sweat Blake had soaked into the fabric over the past 72 hours. I stood at the end of the room, the badge still cold in my hand. Alan sat closest to me, flipping slowly through the packet labeled Contract Addendum. Alcott. Margaret Phase 3 Continuity Authority. He didn't need to read it, he wrote it. But he did anyway, for effect, for weight. Then he began, voice sharp enough to shave with. As of 10:00 a.m. this morning, the board has unanimously approved the reinstatement of Margaret Alcott under revised terms. Effective immediately, she will assume the role of Executive Director of Continuity Strategy. She reports directly to the board and to no one else. No one moved? Alan continued, flipping to the next page like he was carving a gravestone. Under the amended Clause 17.3, the named compliance officer role is now explicitly non-replaceable by proxy. Any future transitions will require her signature, pre-approved by the client, with a minimum 60-day overlap period. Any deviation triggers an automatic halt in operations and reverts full project control to Miss Alcott. Across the table, Harold sat with his hands folded, eyes locked on his son like he was trying to recognize a stranger. Blake sat to his right, pale and quiet. He hadn't spoken since I entered the room. His tie was crooked. His voice, if he had one, was buried under the weight of every decision he made without reading what mattered. Harold didn't speak until Alan finished reading the last page aloud. Then, with the cold dispassion of a man counting his losses, he turned to Blake and whispered, "What have you done?" There was no rage in it, that would have been mercy, just resignation, just defeat. Blake swallowed hard, tried to form a sentence. Failed. Alan added, with no ceremony, Blake Carrington will now serve in a strategic advisory capacity. All access to live contracts, client communications, and vendor systems has been revoked. The words hung there like a noose over a trapdoor. Nobody applauded. Nobody clapped. Not because it wasn't a victory, but because it was too precise, too deliberate. Applause would have cheapened it. I slid the badge across the table. Same one I'd left behind, they hadn't even reassigned it. I picked it up. Fastened it to my lapel. No words, just metal clicking back into place like the lock on a vault. Then I walked the halls. Same walls, same plants. Same corner where someone once left a crock-pot plugged in for 4 days during Thanksgiving and nearly burned down half the server room. But the air had changed. People didn't look away, they looked up. Not with fear, not with fake smiles, just stillness. Acknowledgement, not of power, of permanence. I passed the operations hub where 3 of my old reports were staring at a screen filled with red alerts, alerts they now knew would vanish under my direction. No one said my name, they didn't have to. I reached my office. The nameplate had been removed. I took it from my bag, the one I'd kept buried in a drawer for years, peeled the backing, pressed it back into place, centered it with 2 fingers. Then I sat at my desk, opened the terminal, logged into the compliance backend, navigated to Clause 17.3, clicked Edit, and added one final line: position designated as non-replaceable by proxy unless deceased or physically incapacitated. Authority permanent for project lifecycle. I clicked Save. The cursor blinked once. Then it stopped. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.